Hello everybody and welcome back to an updated deck tech journal style overview of my Gruul Persist combo deck. I've been kind of tinkering around, looking around different ways to improve this deck, and there haven't been too many developments. There have only been a couple that I wanted to go over today, but nothing too revolutionary or shocking, so that's kind of why I've been putting this off. But as a way to kind of like chronicle my improvement of the deck and kind of collect my thoughts over how I've actually been building it, I wanted to get this video out. I don't know, just like I said, just an informal journal entry. So not too much has happened with the deck, like I said. The only real big change or changes that I wanted to talk about. First, we'll talk about the addition of Collected Company. When I posted this deck on Tapped Out, a user by the name of, I think it was Zapier Tumor, suggested that I added Collected Company and Court of Calling in order to improve the consistency of this deck, and he's half right. So with Collected Company, that is a very good card to add, and I think I remember considering adding Collected Company when I originally designed the deck, but there were too many other cards that I liked too much that I felt like I didn't have room for Collected Company, and I didn't necessarily need Collected Company because as I'm just drawing through turn and through turn, eventually I'll just, draw into the combo pieces I need because of how many of each of them there are. That was me being stupid. Collected Company is worth so much more than having the occasional additional pieces that I need, and I ended up taking out the bad ones. With adding cards to decks, you have to consider, is the value of a specific card worth more than the cards that are actually currently in the deck? And that's a really tough thing to wrestle with, because whenever you're adding a card, you also have to take cards out. And in this particular case, looking at Collected Company, I came to the conclusion that having 4 of them is worth more than having the full playset of Birds of Paradise and having the Murderous Redcap. With Birds of Paradise, the whole point of the Mana Dorks overall is just to make the deck faster so I could get those turn 3 wins, but heaven forbid I have to stall once or twice and I'm looking at turn 4 win or turn 5 win. As long as I get my turn 5 win off before the opponent gets their turn 6 win off, then this deck is still going to perform better than theirs in that particular instance. So I don't necessarily need to get the turn 3 win off, so I felt perfectly content with cutting at least 2 of the Mana Dorks that I had. The reason I chose Birds of Paradise as opposed to Ignoble Hierarch is because Ignoble Hierarch does have the Exalted trigger on it. When I'm going for the beatdown plan, I think that's worth more than just having a flyer that can't attack, first off, or realistically can attack, without also having an Exalted trigger on it or having a Rhythm of the Wild counter on it. Or I guess a Grumgully counter. Grumgully helps with that. But either way, having a really small flyer, I don't think that's going to affect how well the deck is going to do in that particular instance. So cut up some of the Mana Dorks, and then I cut out the Murderous Redcap because as I was looking at it, Murderous Redcap does that thing that I really don't like Magic cards doing, and that is just being a win more card. So with this deck, I'm already, if I can get to my plan, I already have as much milling as I need or as much damage as I need between the sacrifice outlets, because that's just how the Persist combo works out. It doesn't matter if I get the extra damage from Murderous Redcap. Once I go off, I'm going off, and it's going to take something else to stop me. Like, it's going to take Graveyard Hate, it's going to take bouncing for anything that negates the counters. There's a couple of ways to disrupt this combo if the opponents have it in hand, but not having additional damage that would be coming from the Murderous Redcap is not going to change anything. So ultimately, if we disregard the passive that Murderous Redcap has, it ends up being a 4-mana Persist creature, which is really bad considering all my other Persist creatures are primarily 2 mana between Lesser Mastercore and Safehold Elite, or the 3 mana with Kitchen Finks, and even then, I still cut out 1 Kitchen Finks and I put it in the sideboard. The only reason it's in the sideboard is because of the gaining 2 life. That would actually help me. That actually does something against other matchups that Murderous Redcap never does against other matchups. And even then, I felt that a 3-mana Persist creature, let alone a 4-mana Persist creature, is not worth running a full playset of. So no matter which odd and end you look at it, Murderous Redcap is not worth running in this deck. So just cut it out entirely, and that's how I made room for the additional Collected Company. So I will say thank you to Zappertumor for reminding me of Collected Company, kind of putting me in, or encouraging me to put myself into a position to consider what cards I'm running versus what cards I should run, and how I can improve the deck through that. That's ultimately what deck designers are supposed to be doing, and I'm not going to go on some self-pity trail of saying I lost my way and I wasn't doing the right thing. It's like, no, I just overlooked this one, even though I shouldn't. So I'll admit that I was wrong, but he was right as far as Collected Company goes. Now, with Chord of Calling, that's a very different beast, and I think it's one that's worth touching on. I am going to say that I am probably never going to put Chord of Calling in this deck or this deck archetype. And I don't like using the word never because I am not a seer, I don't believe in seers, and I can't predict the future. But based on my educational guesses, Chord of Calling is not worth running in this deck in the slightest, and here's why. When Magic players are designing decks, the main thing they are looking for is consistency. They go into a game with a game plan, and they want to be able to pull off that game plan as often as possible. That's why there are various different types of decks. That's why each card has value in its own merit. But people just kind of say, if you want a good Magic deck, make sure it's consistent and then leave it at that. They don't go into unpacking that concept a little bit further. With Magic, there are 2 types of consistency. The first is repetition, and the second is redundancy. A good example of repetition would be, let's say, the mono-white Phyrexian or Solemnity Unlife combo, where if you have Phyrexian Unlife and Solemnity out on the battlefield, you are not going to be losing the game through life loss or damage. In order for that combo to work, you need those 2 cards specifically. You cannot pull off the combo with any other card if you're looking to get that desired effect. That's why it's called the Solemnity Unlife combo. You have to have Solemnity and Phyrexian Unlife. If there was any other cards you could possibly use, it probably wouldn't be called that, and there would be deck lists that don't run full play sets of each. In order to improve the repetition of that, this type of consistency, you could use things like, Idyllic Tutor, which lets you go through your deck to find enchantments, because both Phyrexian Unlife and Solemnity are enchantments, and find those cards specifically. And you're essentially saying that even though Idyllic Tutor doesn't win you the game, they are kind of your pseudo copies of the very specific cards that you're looking for. They'll refer to them as, Idyllic Tutor being the copies 5 through 8 of Solemnity, for instance. And that's how, or at least that's one way that you would improve a Solemnity Unlife deck, is just throwing in cards that will ultimately get you to either Solemnity or Phyrexian Unlife. The second type of consistency that a lot of people don't seem to talk about, but is still just as important, is redundancy. Redundancy is where you don't need specific cards in terms of card name, but you need specific effects on them. And this deck that I'm running, this Gruul Persist combo, this deck is an example of a redundancy deck. I don't care if I don't have Safehold Elite, as long as I have either Lesser Mastercore or Kitchen Finks. In a lot of cases, I don't care if I don't have Malira, as long as I have Rhythm of the Wild or Grumgully. In some cases, I guess technically Goblin Bombardment is better than Altar of Dementia, because it's a lot more common for an opponent to run a one of the old Eldrazi that just shuffle your deck back together so you can't win through milling by Altar of Dementia. But if an opponent's not really doing that, then I don't care if I have an Altar of Dementia or a Goblin Bombardment. I have the effect of sacrificing from one or the other. So as long as I am getting one of those types of effects, which I am improving my deck by including multiple copies of the same effect or similar enough effects, then my deck is becoming more consistent through redundancy. And that's all this deck is. I don't need specific cards, I just need specific effects, and I'm getting those specific effects by running a lot of those different types of cards. In regards to Chord of Calling searches up for a very specific creature as you're casting it. I don't care about specific creatures. I care about having the types of creatures that I need at a time. So with Chord of Calling, it's a great card for finding a very specific thing. Like if you're running a old school Golgari Elves deck, you'd run Chord of Calling in order to tutor out a Shaman of the Pack just for like a one shot. But I don't need to. I just need to get more cards as they come. So ultimately that's why, because Chord of Calling is a consistency card, because Chord of Calling is a repetition tutor as opposed to a redundancy tutor, I don't care. So that's kind of what I've been evaluating. That's why I added the Collected Company, but not the Chord of Calling. Going from there, I've been experimenting with another mechanic, with that being Cascade. So if we look over here, this is just a, sideboard's the same, don't worry about the sideboard. With this one, I took out a lot of cards in order to make room not only for Collected Company, but also for Bloodbraid Elf and Violent Outburst. The only reason I've considered running Violent Outburst is just for the Cascade effect. I really don't care for the creatures get +1/+0 until end turn. It might be nice with it being an instant. I still might play around with this, but ultimately with the Cascade effect, I don't think I'm getting enough value out of this, especially because I'm going to be putting a lot of... the only benefit really, realistically, to Violent Outburst is that it is an instant. I don't hold up mana with this deck, and I don't know if I ever will. It's usually just kind of me either holding my mana until I draw the cards that I need to actually play them, or I'm just dumping my hand on the spot. There's no kind of in between with that. So having an instant cascade effect really doesn't feel as effective. With Bloodbraid Elf, at the very least, it's a 3/2 creature with haste. The fact that it also has Cascade is I'm getting... looking at this, I don't actually run like instants and sorceries in this deck, except for Collected Company, which is never going to hit off of the Cascade from Bloodbraid Elf anyway. So with Bloodbraid Elf, I'm at least getting 2 permanents. One of them being a guaranteed 3/2 with haste, and the other one being whatever combo piece I'm looking for. Worst case scenario, Bloodbraid Elf cascades into a Violent Outburst, which cascades into something from this pile. But having the 2-for-1 value is really nice, especially, well, almost strictly only because this is an aggro deck. If this was, honestly, if Bloodbraid Elf was anything worse than a 3/2 with haste, I'd probably cut it and not consider running it, only because the mana cost is so high. 4 mana is... it's a hefty price. It's already rough enough that it's on Collected Company. Having cards that cost 4 mana, especially in this version where I completely take out all of the mana dorks, I don't... it's a rough inclusion. I still think it's worth it, which is why the version I've been testing so far has been this one. Compared to the previous version that we just looked at, I took out both Birds of Paradise, 1 Ignoble Hierarch, and then an additional Grumgully in order to make room for the additional 4 Bloodbraid Elf. From a quick glance and a couple of games, this feels right. It does feel worth it. I'm not entirely sure yet, but hey, that's the point of putting together a deck and testing it out, is, playing around with it. Magic Online, it has its casual formats. I don't have to dedicate myself to a competitive league or anything in order to test anything out. So yeah, playing around with this version of the list currently, we'll see how it goes. Hasn't been going too bad so far, but I'm still... ultimately, I know that Collected Company is the definite include, and it didn't feel as wrong or as frustrating to remove the Birds of Paradise and the Murderous Redcaps. Those felt like easy removals. Removing a Grumgully and removing even more of the mana dorks, currently it's a price I'm willing to pay, but it might not be worth it. So just something that I'm going to keep my eyes on. Otherwise, always open to suggestions, especially with the sideboard. This is the sideboard I had so far. I think I described my sideboard previously. Damping Sphere because I don't like Tron or Storm. Cinder Vines is helpful because I don't like Storm or any other like the high spell combo decks. Also, it being a threatening artifact or enchantment removal, probably helpful in the modern metagame. Same thing with Wilt, just being artifact or enchantment removal. Prowling Serpapod, I already described in depth why this card is fantastic, in addition to the 4 copies of Rhythm of the Wild. And having the 4th Kitchen Finks for if I ever want additional life gain more consistently. And then Klothys. I don't remember why I put Klothys in here. It just seemed like a good card. But yeah, so any suggestions for the sideboard or the main deck, always welcome. Otherwise, this is currently where I'm at. So hope you guys have a great day, and I'll be looking to put some gameplay up soon. Take care.